Left academia, here's why, a Black woman's perspective. So I'm going to answer 4 questions in this video. 1, do you regret studying philosophy? I majored in philosophy and got a master's and PhD in philosophy. What advice would you give to students? Do you regret leaving academia? And how do you maintain intellectual community? I am Dr. Catherine Sophia Bell, and I did all the things that Black women are told we are supposed to do. I got all of the degrees, all of the certifications, the successful career, the marriage, the children. I had all of it, and I felt trapped by all of it. So I liberated myself, and now I live life on my own terms, focusing on the things that I love, from reading, writing, speaking, and coaching, to embracing my sensuality and sexuality with lovers and in Black king spaces. So on this channel, I focus on my core pillars of liberation and transformation, and I share my journey in an effort to motivate you on your own liberation and transformation journey. And I'm also trying to build a beloved community along the way. So thanks for joining me. So I saw a video on YouTube. The title of it is I Left Academia, Here's Why, by someone named Jared Henderson. So Jared is also a philosopher, but is not a Black woman. So I'm joining this conversation that he started in his video from a Black woman's perspective. So his primary points and questions, he was a philosopher. He went to graduate school with the dream of becoming a professor and expecting to get a tenure track position, but he quickly realized that he could not compete and was not likely to get a tenure track position, which he also refers to as doing time on the tenure track until you get tenure. And at the point that you get tenure, then you have a job for life. I think this language is interesting. It's not unique to Jared. So a lot of people use the language of like doing your time in the tenure track until you get tenure. And a lot of people refer to tenure track positions as a job for life, right? But what's interesting about this is it sounds very much like how would I call it? Like being incarcerated, right? Like serving time for a life sentence, right? So it's just interesting the way that language parallels. I'm not saying being a tenure track professor is like being in prison, but I am saying it's interesting that there's similar language that's used around getting tenure and earning tenure. Okay, so basically he decided to leave academia when he looked at the prospects of him getting a tenure track job were very low and how competitive it was. He was talking about how there's like 200 people that might apply for one single position. And so when he kind of looked at those odds, he decided to leave academia altogether. So my experience is very different, right? I had multiple tenure track jobs. So my first tenure track position was at Vanderbilt University, where I had my primary appointment was in African American and Diaspora Studies, and I had what they called a courtesy appointment in philosophy at Vanderbilt University. And then I left Vanderbilt and went to Penn State University, where I earned tenure. So I was at Vanderbilt for 3 years. I was at Penn State University for about 15 years. Altogether, I was in the academy for 20 years, from 2003 when I got my PhD to 2023 when I resigned/retired from being a philosophy professor. So I want to make the point that the stakes for me as a Black woman who was already a tenured associate professor were very different than for Jared, who was just coming out of graduate school, who did not like the prospects of the numbers in terms of the possibility or the likelihood of him getting a tenure track position. So he opted out of it. So very different backgrounds for Jared and for myself in terms of experience, as well as race, gender, and other kinds of things. So what's interesting for me is I actually left the academy with tenure, again, right before I was about to go up for promotion to full professor. So I was basically at the top of my game, right? I knew I was going to get tenure. I had already published, I published Hannah Arendt, the Negro Question. That was basically my tenure book. And then I published Beauvoir and Belle, A Black Feminist Critique of the Second Sex, which would have been the book that got me the promotion to full professor. But I knew it was time for me to step out and leave. So I walked away before actually putting in my materials to go up for promotion to full professor. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's get to some of his descriptions of, or his responses to these questions. So the question that he responded to is, do you regret studying philosophy? And he said no. He enjoyed his graduate program. He liked his colleagues. He wasn't like in a toxic department or at a toxic institution. And he did not take on student loans in order to go to graduate school. And this is something that I agree with. I also enjoyed my undergraduate as well as my graduate program for majoring in philosophy and getting a master's and PhD. I also did not take out student loans to pay for graduate school. So the way the graduate program was that I attended, you basically got full tuition and you also got an assistantship. And part of your duties for the assistantship included like being a research assistant or being a teaching assistant, and then eventually teaching your own course. What advice would you give to students? So he said he believes that philosophy is a great major and he would recommend philosophy as a major, especially as a double major. And I also agree with this. I really loved majoring in philosophy at Spelman. I really loved earning a master's and PhD in philosophy from the University of Memphis. I was able to focus on the research areas that I wanted to focus on, which included for me African American and Africana philosophy, Black feminist philosophy, Continental philosophy, especially existentialism and phenomenology, and also did like social political philosophy and some ethics. So I was able to study the things that I wanted to study. I was able to write the papers that I wanted to write in graduate school. And then even when I became a professor, I was able to publish the things that I wanted to publish. Like I wanted to write the book, Hannah Arendt and the Negro Question. I wanted to write the book, Beauvoir and Belle, A Black Feminist Critique of the Second Sex, right? Those were books that I wanted to read. Toni Morrison has this quote, if there's a book that you really want to read that hasn't been written, you have to be the one to write it. So those first two books that I wrote were books that I wanted to be able to read as a philosopher in the discipline of philosophy that had not been written. So I went ahead and wrote those books. So I enjoyed majoring in philosophy and also getting a master's and PhD in philosophy. I also enjoyed, well, I won't say necessarily I appreciated and learned a lot from my administrative experience. So when I was a professor, I also did a lot of administrative duties. So I was the director of graduate studies at one point. I was the placement officer at one point. I was an interim head of a department at one point, and I also was the director of a research center. And I also did some coaching with faculty, right? So those were all things that were kind of in my wheelhouse, but also taught me things like managing a team, managing a budget. So I took a lot of skills away from both philosophy in terms of critical thinking and things like that, what kinds of questions to ask, how to know when you're getting a BS answer, as well as skills in terms of administrative skills and managing budgets, managing people, and those kinds of things. So those were all good takeaways for me to take with me once I left academia. Or I guess another way to put it is those were great skill sets that I can leverage outside of the academy that weren't limited to me staying stuck in the academy once I was ready to go. Okay, so those were the two of the questions that he answered. I also want to answer two primary questions that I often get about leaving academia. So one of those questions is, do you regret leaving academia? And I can give an enthusiastic no to this question. I have zero regrets about leaving academia. I would say I enjoyed it about the first 10 years of it. And then about halfway in, because again, I left after 20 years, about halfway in, I knew I wanted to do something different. And I first got this inkling actually when I first started coaching. So I first started coaching before I got tenure. I was coaching other faculty in a program that was run by somebody else. And I realized that I was very good at coaching. I also realized that I could leverage and translate my skills as a philosopher and the methodologies I use as a philosopher through my coaching. So a lot of the deeper existential questions that get asked in philosophy are actually very pertinent questions in the coaching space with people trying to figure out like their work goals, their life goals, whatever the case may be. So I had kind of become disillusioned with or frustrated with academia and philosophy. And then I kind of got recharged once I started coaching and realized like, oh, I can actually do this in a different kind of space. So I would say that was about 10 years in. And then 10 years ago is when I started realizing like, well, two things. I knew I wanted to leave my marriage and I also knew I wanted to leave the academy, but I didn't feel like I could do both at the same time. So I practiced my exit strategy from the marriage first and got happily unmarried and delightfully divorced. And then once I did that, I kind of had to recover from that in terms of, you know, just getting myself organized and getting things in order to then plot my exit and execute my exit strategy out of academia. So I have zero regrets about leaving my marriage and zero regrets about leaving the academy. I make amazing life choices, and life on the other side of that decision has been amazing and fabulous for me. So yeah, I have zero regrets about those decisions. And I would say my quality of life has improved tremendously from both of those exits, again, from marriage as well as from academia. And I also say my decision in preparation to get happily unmarried and delightfully divorced gave me a very excellent framework for the decision to leave academia and knowing kind of the stages of preparation for doing that. So yes, zero regrets about leaving the academy and good life choices always. Okay, so the last question that I want to respond to is, how do you maintain an intellectual community? So one of the things that Jared mentioned he misses since leaving academia is being connected to academic communities and being connected to people who read deeply and think about certain kinds of things. And so again, I'm very different in that regard because I'm still very connected to my intellectual community, right? So I cultivated a beautiful, powerful community over the 20 years that I was in academia. And I often tell people my academic friends are in relationship with me. They weren't in relationship with the institution where I worked. So the fact that I left academia did not mean that I was suddenly cut off from my academic friends or from the intellectual community. So I'm still in very close relationship and friendship with people who are still academics, many of whom who want me to help them plot their exits, and I help them do that. But I also still attend conferences when I want to. And I also still give keynotes and lectures and talks and things like that. So for example, I quit/retired in June of 2023. In August of 2023, I gave a keynote address at an international Hannah Arendt conference. Again, my first book was on Hannah Arendt. So I was the keynote speaker for an international Hannah Arendt conference in Scotland in August, for example. And then there was a Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival conference. It was the 50th anniversary of the first poetry festival, Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival conference in Jackson, Mississippi in November of last year. And I also attended that conference. And it was beautiful to be, again, in this beloved community, in this intellectual community. When you're registering for conferences, there's a space where you put your academic affiliation or institutional affiliation. And I was able to put in La Belle Vie Academy, which is my academy, and not have to put another university or another college as my institutional affiliation. So that's one way that I maintain intellectual community. Well, two ways that I mentioned so far. One is I'm still friends with a lot of intellectuals and academics. Two, I still attend conferences, but only on my own terms and only around people that I want to be around. Another way that I maintain academic connection or intellectual community is through my coaching. So a lot of my coaching clients are still professors. So I help the people navigate from like graduate school to being an assistant professor or pre-tenure professor. I help people navigate going from assistant professor to associate professor, and also going from associate professor to full professor. I also still work with faculty who are trying to negotiate and balance between like their research, teaching, and service, and say administrative work, because I did all of those things very well and very successfully. And so those are three of the ways. Another way is La Belle Vie Writers. So I have a predominantly Black and women of color virtual writing community. We write daily, usually in the morning from like 9 to 11 Eastern time, and then in the afternoons from 1 to 3 Eastern time. People kind of pop in and pop out. So people don't have to be there the full 2-hour block, but they can come in for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 60, 90, whatever. But having that space is just a beautiful intellectual community. It's a space where people can come and get their writing done. It's something that they can put on their calendar, because a lot of times when you're a professor, you're being pulled in a lot of different directions, again, with the research, teaching, and service, but the research tends to fall through the cracks. And so La Belle Vie Writers is a space that people can come and have it on their calendar, like this is my time for writing, and get their writing done and advance their writing projects. So I love that intellectual community that I've been able to create and cultivate with La Belle Vie Writers. And then finally, my exit strategies program, right? So I am still I'm still in intellectual community, again, with academics, not only who are in the academy, but also people who, like me, want to leave the academy. And so through exit strategies, I offer some just really pragmatic planning and the proverbial permission slip to quit your academic job and leave your professor position, right? So those are the ways that I've maintained intellectual community. Again, staying in friendships with people that I was already friends with, continuing to go to conferences I want to go to, and then through my own La Belle Vie Academy, offering coaching, offering the writing space, and also offering exit strategies for people who want to leave. So that is my response to I left academia. Here's why. I will elaborate on that in other videos. So I will continue to do some videos on my own exit strategies and why I left academia. But for me, I will say for me, I left because it no longer felt aligned. For me, what I really loved about being a professor and being academic had to do with the research and the writing, and things that started to weigh on me and distract me and take away from my time for doing the research and writing included the teaching responsibilities, the grading, the letters of recommendation, not comprehensive exams, but the different committees, being on a bunch of different committees, being in different department meetings, all of that kind of stuff. So the stuff that I did not enjoy about being in the academy began to outweigh the stuff that I did enjoy. And when I took inventory of these are the things that I really love to do, mainly reading, writing, kind of coaching and connecting with people on that level, I could do all of those things outside of the academy. I didn't need to be a professor at a university to do things that I love. So I gave myself permission to leave, to focus on the things that I love loved and walk away from the things that weren't working for me. And it also just didn't feel aligned for me at a certain point. So I know when and how to walk away from things that don't feel right for me anymore or don't feel aligned for me anymore. And I often say, my ancestors told me not only to get out, but to get out now. And I know how to trust and follow my intuition and my ancestors. So that's a short version of my story. So I would like to hear back from you. I want to know what you majored in college. If you have a master's or if you have a PhD, let me know what you majored in, what you got your master's, what you got your PhD in. If you're an academic, let me know, do you have an academic job? Is it a tenure track or tenured position, or is it a contingency position or like an adjunct position? And if you are in the academy, I would love to hear if you're thinking about leaving. So let me know in the comments. What did you study? Did you go to graduate school? What did you study in graduate school? Are you in the academy? Are you thinking about leaving? So communicate with me, get into conversation with me in the comments, because I would love to hear from you. And I will be checking the comments and responding to the comments. So I'm happy for you to put things there so that I can be in conversation with you, because as I said, I want to build beloved community on this channel. So thanks again for joining me for this discussion. My next video will be also focused on Black women leaving the academy. So please tune into that next video on that topic. I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel, like and share my channel, and please do watch my next video on Black women leaving academia. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or night, depending on when you're watching the video. Thanks. Bye.